Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 29. So, as this episode airs, it will be December 21st, 2016, and this will be our last episode of the year. And so, I've been thinking a bit about what I wanted to say to you all as we head into the new year, and it's hard, because there's so much going on in the world, so much turmoil, so much uncertainty, so much fear. I know for a lot of people, me included, it feels like everything is about to come crashing down, and it's hard to know what to do or how to be or how to feel. One of the things I've seen a lot of people talking about in the wake of the election has been hope or hopelessness. And there are a lot of people, really smart people, who I respect a lot, people whose job it is to know how the world works, and a whole lot of these people are talking about hope and about how what it seems like so many of us want, those of us who had been comfortable up until recently, what we say we want and what we look for from the people giving us explanations is hope. And I see people talking about that, saying that we all have this need to be reassured, to be made comfortable. And mostly when we ask other people, and usually it's marginalized people we're asking, when we ask other people for hope, that what we're really doing is asking them to make us feel better. And I get that. I get it, I do. But I still think there's room for hope in the world. In fact, I think it's necessary. And I don't mean the kind of easy kind of hope that we look for in platitudes. I don't mean that we should ever look away from the world as it is or stop engaging our critical faculties when we think about what might happen, what needs to be done, and what we're up against. But fundamentally, we have to believe that things can get better, that through our actions, we can make things better. If we don't believe that, then there's no reason not to just give up and die. That belief, that's what hope is. And when we feel scared or daunted by the tasks at hand, the size of the tasks, or how big the opposition looks, it's only hope that can sustain us, that can keep us in that place where we refuse to give in and we keep on fighting. Going into the new year, I'm thinking about all the fights to come and what I can do to help. And I'm holding on to the hope that we can make this world a better place. And I hope you will too. So, today's guest is photographer Matt Eich, and I think this is a pretty timely conversation. I've been a fan of Matt's work for some time now, and this past October I got a chance to see him give a presentation at the Medium Festival of Photography, where he presented this huge 4-part documentary photography series that he's been working on for the past 10 years. It's called the Invisible Yoke, and it consists of 4 parts, each one focusing on a different community. The first part, Carry Me, Ohio, was just released as a book by Sturm and Drang Press, which is unfortunately already sold out, so you'll just have to take my word for it that it's a beautiful book. Anyway, Matt moves through these communities in Ohio, Mississippi, and Virginia in his work, coming back to the same places over and over again, and really getting to know the communities that he photographs. And that shows in his work because there's a deep sensitivity for these people in all of his photographs and the kinds of lives they live, what kinds of issues they deal with, whether it's economic depression, resource depletion, drug abuse, racism, segregation, or whatever it is that's actually happening. And he manages to depict these people and these communities in a way that avoids stereotypes. We got into all of this when we talked, which was last month, about a week before the election. Now, I have to warn you that the audio for this episode is unfortunately a little rough. We had kind of a lot of bad luck with airplane noise and some bird noise and not the best phone connection. But if you can bear with it, I promise you it's worth it. Okay, ready? Here's my conversation with Matt Eich. I've been following your work for a while now. I was thinking about this last night. I was watching the Game 7 of the World Series last night, and then I was also sort of thinking about what to talk about this morning. And I was thinking about trying to figure out when it was that I first became aware of your work, and I think it was like in maybe 2011 that you had an interview on with Jörg Kohlberg. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think that would be about right. Probably late 2011, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. And the first thing that really drew me into your work was actually your family-oriented work, this series that you have called Love in the First Person. And what really struck me at the time was how, like, the images that you have in that series are very, like, they're very real in that, like, there's never a point when you're sort of shying away from the messiness of life, but they're also very tender as well. And then when I saw your other work, and then again when you gave your presentation at the Medium Festival this year, it really struck me that those qualities carry through in your documentary work as well.
Yeah. I guess I'll just try and riff off of that, because it's not a question.
It's true. It's not a question. Sorry.
It's totally good. I like having kind of this fluid conversation. I think that would work well. Well, really early on, a classmate of mine showed me a book by Eugene Richards. I think it was Cocaine Blue, Cocaine True. And that was, like, up until that point, I'd looked at some National Geographic stuff, and I'd seen James Notway. I hadn't seen anything that was that intimate or personal before. And then when I became more familiar with his work, the thing that continued to kind of draw me back time and time again was primarily his ability to blur the lines between where his personal life ended and where his professional life began. Like, he would have a photograph of his wife in bed or his son in the bathtub, and kind of in the same context as photographs of cocaine addicts or people in all kinds of walks of life, and he photographed them all with the same level of intimacy and authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was always a goal of mine when making pictures. It's like, how can I photograph the stranger with the same sort of level of respect or love or intimacy that I would apply to my own family?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Finding, like, the longer I go about it, the more my true feelings kind of come through, and a really intuitive editor can pick that out in the pictures. Like, oh, you were angry when you made this picture, or you thought this person was an asshole, and that's why the picture looks this way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to hide my true beliefs or feelings when I'm making work a lot of the time, but I try and temper that with sort of awareness of how I see the people that I love and trying to apply that to people that I may even disagree with.
Mm-hmm. It's something that I know gets talked about in photojournalism circles a lot, which isn't necessarily exactly what I would call what you do exactly. Like, what your work seems, if there's can be said to be a difference between documentary and photojournalism, I think there is, then your work seems to be more on the documentary side. But in photojournalism, people talk a lot about objectivity and a lot about trying to remove your personal slant or biases from the images or from the work. But for most of us who are used to dealing with images, it's the kind of thing that seems kind of, to me anyways, always seemed kind of sort of like a fool's errand. Like, there's no real way for anybody to be objective. Mm-hmm. And but I'm it's interesting to hear you say that your editors, for example, are able to pick your feelings out of your pictures. I think that that's something that, to me, like what comes across in a lot of your images is a real deep sensitivity for the people that you're photographing and a sense of connection with them, and that you actually really care about these people and these communities. Is that something, like, do you end up having to have these kinds of conversations with editors when you're presenting work?
Sorry, you dropped out at a certain point. I wanted to make sure you were done asking that question.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the last bit again?
Yeah, just do you end up having to have these kind of conversations about objectivity with your editors and things like that? Is this something that like, is there sort of a, you sort of know what I'm saying? Like, your pictures have a point of view. You know what I mean?
Right. I guess it comes through this conversation of objectivity and subjectivity comes through in different ways with different editors, different clients.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time you get ideally hired because you have a subjective point of view and they want you to go apply that to a certain topic. And sometimes you go and you make it back and the editor's truly looking for something else. I also hear a plane approaching, so I might want to
yeah, that's
stop
on my
for
end.
a minute. No, actually, I hear it on my end.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm in the flight path here as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes editors, when they look at your take, they're like, well, I only see this thing, but I wanted this thing instead. And then you have to kind of walk them through what your experience was, what the light was like, or what the subject was like, or how you were feeling that day, and why you made the pictures you did.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully they can get behind that. But sometimes, it doesn't jive with their view of the story or whatever, and that's just, the cost of doing business.
Mm-hmm.
But I always try and think about the client's needs when I'm on a job and say, like, okay, let's cover those bases, and once that's done, then I can truly explore, have fun, or just see what unfolds.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the shoots are portraits, and so that's literally me saying, like, stand here, do this, let's use this light and this environment to make something interesting. And so that's all about subjectivity, that I try not to over-research somebody before I go photograph them, because I don't want to impose too much on them, and I keep the conversation light, and I keep it super relaxed. It's most of the time, not all of the time. And I usually go pretty low-key without assistants or lights or anything. I can when I need to, but oftentimes it's just me. So I kind of think that, at least for me, I don't really think about objectivity very much, other than trying to always put myself in the other person's shoes, even if I disagree with them. Think, like, why would they believe this? Is that my end or your end?
That's me. Sorry.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
right next to the Miramar Marine base, so we get a lot of F-16s going over.
That's a familiar sound, having lived in Hampton Roads for a long time before this.
Yeah.
There's a little regional airport just 4 miles down the road from here, and we are right in the path.
Mm.
So we'll probably be something that goes overhead while we're talking.
So, like, I know that you and you just mentioned you work, you do assignment work, and then you also have documentary projects that are personal, and I'm kind of curious, like, is your approach or your way of working particularly different, or are they are fairly similar when you're shooting on an assignment or versus working on one of your own projects?
The parameters in which the pictures are made differs. Like, usually an assignment's a really compressed period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And you have certain expectations, like, make a vertical, make a horizontal, do this, do that, cover these, check these boxes. And the assignments are personal work is a lot looser, where it's go to this place, hang out, see what happens. Maybe you make a picture, maybe you don't. Maybe you just have a conversation. Either way, I'm just trying to like sponge things up. But aesthetically, I try and maintain a similar approach. So, like, an example would be ESPN sent me to cover a college football game in Bristol, Tennessee recently. It was a big college game, sellout crowd, like a record-setting crowd. And I'm not a sports photographer. I didn't bring a lens longer than 100 millimeters. They didn't want me to shoot the game, thankfully. They wanted me to shoot everything leading up to and around the game. So I'd go to the arena and I'd shoot the fans, and they had a Kenny Chesney concert, and I shot that and slipped in a puddle of vomit, and, you know, like, photographed everything from morning till long after dark for close to 5 days, including like the game and the sidelines and stuff. But so throughout the process, I'm turning in pictures to the client, and they want the things that I found on the sides, you know, running between the hotel and the arena, or getting breakfast somewhere. Like, the camera's always there. And on an assignment, I can kind of say, and sometimes with personal work as well, depending on how loose the subject matter is, I'm just here for the purpose of making pictures. And with an assignment, you kind of have a little bit of an excuse. Personal work, it's harder sometimes to approach people, but, you know, like, I made a picture on this ESPN assignment. It was of a preacher behind his church watering the grass. I didn't know it was a church. I didn't know it was the preacher. I just saw this older man watering in this beautiful light, and whipped the car over and jumped out and went to have a conversation. Made a picture of him. They didn't run it, turned it in, but they ran other weird pictures of random people that I met around town. And yeah, that's kind of the ideal blending of personal and professional. So I made a decent rate for a few days. I was able to pay rent. I was able to pay an assistant a good wage. He helped out while we were filing during the game and all of this stuff. And made pictures for the client that served their purposes, and I made pictures that served my artistic purposes as well. That's kind of the ideal scenario in a lot of ways. It doesn't happen that way very often, but you know, the style that I'm shooting for the client matches with the style of work I'm making for my personal project. So this photograph will now be included in future edits for like chapter 4 of the Invisible Yoke series. That's this kind of meandering American journey.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue, because that's where I wanted to go next, is talking about this series of projects that you have, the Invisible Yoke. It's a pretty ambitious series that you have going. It's in 4 parts. The first of which just got published as a book, Carry Me, Ohio, which I have in my hands right now, and it's a gorgeous book. You know, the photograph, you showed images from all 4 chapters of it in your presentation at Medium this year, and the scope of it is pretty impressive. But what's interesting to me is that, like, for such a you know, like a big scope of subject, the subject more or less being America, all of these pictures feel really personal, and that, like I was saying before, that really seems to me to be like sort of one of the hallmarks of all of the photographs of yours that I've seen, that there's this real connection between you and the people and places that you're photographing. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about this project of yours, this series of projects.
Yeah. Well, I studied photojournalism in undergrad, and that's where Carry Me, Ohio started, and started hyper-focused on one family, and then another family, and then one town and another town, and things just sort of rippled out. And it took a while before I realized that it was actually a body of work coming together. Mm. And in similar ways, a lot of these other projects have begun forming over time in a really slow, organic kind of way. And in photojournalism school, you're taught to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I was never really good at that. I was never really convinced that that's where photography had the most potential, or the most interest for me, at least. Like, Eugene Smith knocked it out of the park. Like, I don't know if anybody can really, like, try and continue repeating some of these things effectively. So where I feel like photography is interesting is kind of the intangible aspects of it. Memory, just the ability to encapsulate the feeling of a place, all of those sorts of things. So over time, I kind of realized I was gathering these photographs, and I began putting them into piles. I had the Ohio series, the Mississippi series, which started as an assignment, and again, very hyper-focused on one neighborhood, and I kind of expanded over time. And then Virginia work, which I was making while living in Norfolk, and gathering from assignments and family work. And then I realized that I started putting them together as books. And when I had just the three, I flipped through them all really fast. At one point when I'd assembled kind of rough maquettes, and I was left wanting more and feeling a little disappointed. And that's when I realized, like, I've been wandering around America making these orphan photographs that don't have a home for a long time, some for assignments, mostly for myself, and started pulling those together. And the strange organic evolution of the work is that, again, it started hyper-focused. Ohio, it's about a region, and some issues that region kind of embodies that are part of the American experience, I would say. Connection to industry, rural life, rural poverty, farming, connection to the land. Mississippi embodies segregation, racism, this kind of cultural divide between white and black, where they depend upon one another to survive, and their history is inextricably linked, but there's still a lot of tension there. And then in Virginia, where I was living, it's the military-industrial complex and the Navy, the way that influences life and community and politics and all of those things. And then the America chapter is really just kind of touching on the photographic legacy of the American road trip. It's been well trodden in the past, and I don't think I'll be able to do anything better than Winogrand or Frank or Richards or any of these other cats that have come before me, that felt the need to put something together that is my kind of overall view of America. So with each project, there's a slight widening. I think Ohio and Mississippi are both still pretty focused and kind of more easily categorized as photojournalistic as a result. Even though, like, all the work is made in the documentary tradition, the threads are much looser with the later projects like the Seven Cities and the final chapter about America at large. So I'm more excited the further I go, just thinking there are no limitations, geographic boundaries. I want to see it, this kind of wide scope of America, and then try and distill it into its most potent form.
Yeah. It's interesting because, so like you were saying, especially with the first two series, you kind of almost sort of stumbled into, with Carry Me, Ohio, and then the Sin and Salvation in Baptist-town. One of them was just where you happened to be when you were in school, and one of them you were sent on an assignment.
You could argue the same for the third as well. I just happened to be living in Virginia, and eventually decided, okay, like this should be a body of work, and I'm going to pitch it to a museum, and like, that was a whole different experience from the previous ones, and it required a lot more planning and more thought, and provided some limitations that were good and some that were bad, but ultimately the work's not done yet. So that's the good thing. The bad thing about these projects is that they can go on forever.
Yeah, it's always sort of tough to know when you have something kind of open-ended, and this sort of gets at what I was just thinking about just now, is that, like, some people will approach a project, whether it's documentary or fine art or whatever, with sort of an idea in mind of what they want it to be, and it seems like mostly your approach is not that, is more like sort of finding yourself in a situation and being attracted to certain things, and then seeing what you have later. But like particularly with this fourth chapter, where you're sort of talking about sort of a more broad view of America as a whole, it's like, because the first three chapters are all pretty focused on like specific communities, the fourth one having such a wider scope, like I'm just sort of curious, like how that works in terms of like how much are you setting into it with like an expectation of what you're going to find, or of a story that you want to tell, or a portrait that you want to make, and how much of it is just exploration on a broader scale?
I think it's a hybrid in a lot of ways. So the pictures up until this point are mostly like 2005, 2006 until present, and theoretically this will go until about 2020 for the final chapter where that comes out. That's assuming a lot of things that I'm able to keep on this kind of tight production schedule with the other chapters. So I've had some assignments, some things that are just random gigs here or there. Some are things that I've pitched. So like the Kentucky Derby or the Sweetwater Rattlesnake Roundup in Sweetwater, Texas, being examples of things that I'd heard about or I'd seen some visuals from, and I thought I could go and explore this and just see what I can find. Pitched them to places, basically was able to cover expenses to go and make photographs. And then, so I have a kind of mini essay about this event that I could license to a publication, but really what I'm looking for is like one good picture that could be part of this book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had dozens of little things like that over the years, drawing from all of them, and then sometimes it's saying, well, I've got this thing I'm speaking at in Seattle, so I'm going to fly into LA and say hey to some friends and road trip up the coast with a buddy, and we're going to shoot the whole way up and stop and photograph this event in San Francisco, and then we're going to drive across the country. So it's very nebulous. It's got little like kind of pins dropped along the way, if you will. Like, this is an interesting place. We'll check this out. Check this out. We'll check this out, and then just seeing what you stumble into. So, yeah, it's a mix of planning and happenstance. Like, pictures can't really be preconceived at all. I just need to get there and see what it's like. And oftentimes, it's not what I expect. And it can go either way, where you're like, this is way better than I thought it would be. Or out I had, like, if you hype it up in your head and you get there and, all right, this is not at all what I was imagining. And I try and be really open to things that friends hear about or suggest. I've got a buddy that, right after we moved from Ohio to Virginia, I was feeling really lost. This was a few months before I ever went to Mississippi. I said, hey, I met this guy, and, you're like, I have a coworker who hunts alligators, and he knows these guys that are really interesting. You should come hang out with them and go alligator hunting. Just as simple as that. And I was had a little bit of money in the bank account. I had nothing to do time-wise, no assignments or anything. So I rolled the dice, went down there for a couple of days. I was sick as a dog. My buddy dropped me off at the boat ramp. I was picked up by two men in a boat named Rebel and Julius, and I hung out with them for like 2 or 3 days and stayed in some guy's guest bedroom in this little town in Louisiana. It was a super surreal experience, and not something that I would have, looked for or found on my own somehow, but it just like fell in my lap. And so when things like that happen, I just try and say yes and go with it. And sometimes I could just be wandering and somebody comes up and strikes up a conversation and can go with it. That's generally the way that pictures are made. And sometimes you find them in your day-to-day life, and sometimes you have to go looking for them. But maintaining an openness is really important in the work.
So since I actually have the Carry Me Ohio book here, I spent some time with it over the past, I don't know, what it's been like 2 weeks or so since since the festival. I got this book, and just sort of going through it, that, one of the things that strikes me about this, first of all, I thought it was really interesting what you said before about photographs. What's interesting to you about them is not like telling a story exactly, but rather that the other aspects of it, like memory and emotion and things like that. What I think is interesting about this this book, thinking about that statement that you made, is that it really doesn't feel so much like a story that you're telling so much as a portrait that you're painting, right? Like, how to put this? Like, you get a sense of the people that you're shooting, and you get a sense of what life is like in these communities. And there's a very strong emotion running through many of these pictures, but it's not exactly like a narrative. And I think that's sort of an interesting approach, but like it's sort of different from a lot of other documentary work that I've seen in that respect. One of the things that I find so compelling about this work is that, like, there's a real pathos to it, and like a real sort of, what am I trying to say here? It feels very relevant to the sort of conversations that we're all having right now. So this episode probably won't release for a little while, but as we're recording it, it's less than a week before the election. And, a lot of the things that we're sort of grappling with and talking about on a national level right now, it seems like what you're showing here through all of these different series, it really bears on that, on what we're talking about right now. And I realize, again, this isn't really a question, but I don't know. It seems to me like that there are aspects to this that are important that we talk about. That looking at things as they are, instead of sort of trying to force a narrative onto them, is it's an important part of what we ought to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly want for the work to have social relevance. And an interesting struggle with being an independent photographer doing long-form documentary projects of just about any variety. But this kind of slow burn stuff in particular is that it doesn't have much of a news hook, and that's how you find paying work or paying outlets generally, is like it has to have a news hook. Mm-hmm. And so these stories kind of come into the public light or public eye every 4 years on average. And, if you're working on something for 10 plus years, maybe it'll go through a couple rotations, but for the most part, people are interested in what's like new and what's now, and it's not poverty or alienation or like disenfranchisement or any of these things that I tend to find wherever I go, because they're universal stories in America. But like, so this is all to say that this comes into the news every 4 years, essentially, but I'm curious about this over a much longer span of time. But this is something that these people that I'm documenting are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So, I don't know. It's really interesting to watch how things don't change very quickly in a lot of places. And I think one of the reoccurring feelings that I have when making the work, wandering around, is like, am I really in 2016? Is this what's going on right now? I don't know if it's disappointment or disillusionment that I feel a lot of the time, like partially in myself and partially in the larger country. But yeah, I feel like all of those feelings work their way into the photographs.
So, I mean, I know this isn't really... I've asked this question to other documentary photographers before, and it's a little bit of a tricky thing because it's not really your job exactly to have an answer for this kind of thing. But like particularly with the Ohio series, I guess really in all of them, like the Ohio series is what I have open in front of me right now, and there's this real sort of sense of, I mean, decay is not exactly the right word. The image that really sticks with me out of this whole series, there's a few of them, but one of them that really sticks with me is sort of near the middle of the book. You have this sort of group portrait of a bunch of people. It looks like they're at a prom or something. Mm-hmm. And for me, when there's this thing that I tend to do, which is a little morbid, I guess, but like I can't go to a high school graduation anymore without thinking about how, for a lot of the kids that are there, like it's a happy occasion and everybody's proud and excited, but what always ends up sticking with me is that, like, for a lot of these kids, like, things are about to get a lot worse. Like, they have to get a job now, and maybe they won't be able to do that. And, things are, if not worse, things are about to get difficult in new ways. And looking at that one photograph of all of those kids, they're all dressed up, and, it's in pretty stark contrast to most of the rest of the images in this set, that they're all, pretty fancied up. That, especially in the context of it, I get this feeling like almost like this is like their last hurrah kind of thing. And the question that I end up having sometimes when I look at work where, there are all these really big problems that are being depicted, do you feel a sense of hope for the future, or do you not really think too much about that?
Well, I mean, let's think of all of this work as connected. Mm-hmm. So, I am a occupant of America. I have hope that the future will be better, brighter, or whatever adjective you want to use for my children, because I really want them to have more opportunities than the previous generation. I don't want them to constantly be overshadowed by like U.S. war presence all over the world and interracial turmoil and socioeconomic divide rapidly growing. All of this kind of stuff that we feel like is the baggage that our generation's carrying forward. Like I want something better for them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think different realities await these different communities that I've been depicting, like Ohio, they're not going to have a return of industry. I'm sorry, like even if Trump's elected, he's not going to resurrect coal there. Like it's just not going to happen. It's not viable on so many levels. And in Mississippi, like yes, I want to see racial relations improved and like, wounds healed, and I want to see more upward growth and socioeconomic and like academic advancement in the black communities and all of this stuff. And in Virginia, I don't even know like, what my relationship is with my home state, but it's a very diverse and complicated place. And like, I honestly think that the military influence in the Norfolk, Hampton Roads area is going to change over the years. I don't think that it's going to continue being the center for the Navy and shipbuilding, because we've got these crazy rising tides and things are changing. I don't know if it's going to be sustainable long term. So these are just uncertainties that I have about all of these communities. Some people will escape, a lot of people won't. Yeah, so in that kind of high school prom photograph, it's interesting when we were talking about it, I was thinking like prom is kind of like a funeral for youth in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, all right, this is the final hurrah, and then like maybe you go to college and you have some parties, and then real life begins. But for most of those kids, it was like right after college, real life began. The whole region's overrun by drugs and other issues. The jobs are not very common. Yeah, most of the people that do something have to leave. And with really strong ties to family and land, that's not an easy expectation. Just leave. It's a lot harder than you would think.
Yeah.
So I want to be hopeful that I don't know what the right word would be.
Yeah.
Like a hopeful pessimist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes looking at the real world can make it hard to be hopeful, but and I guess there's always something. I guess what what do you see these photographs, like what their role being in this whole process? And like is like I know you've talked before about about having hope that this work can be a part of a process of positive change. Is that, I mean, do you feel that's a conversation that in the photography community we end up having a lot, is like what can photography actually do? Mm-hmm. And so what do you hope for with this work, and what do you think photography can do?
That's a can
It's
of
a big
worms.
question.
Yeah. That's something I'm still teasing out, man. And this is like 10 years into it. Like, what can photography do? What can't it do? I personally believe that the possibilities are endless, but that the cards are stacked against things happening, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because photography is a language, and it's a universal language in a lot of ways, but as such, it can kind of be read in a myriad of ways. So occasionally that works to your advantage, and sometimes quite the opposite. So being specific with your intent, I think, is really important. And occasionally pictures surface that change course of policy or history, but those are super few and far between. So I feel like at most I can try and be a connector and a advocate for positive change in the community. And a lot of what I depict is not super positive by most standards. So I've been trying to balance that as best I can. So that can be a challenge to do well. And I feel like photography has an immense capability to as a communication device. But we haven't figured out how to completely use that. And the internet's done a lot of great things, and it's upset the balance too, at least in terms of industry economics and the value of the photograph. But more and more photographs are needed for pretty much everything. It's an expected visual component of our day-to-day communication.
It's a lot to get your arms around.
Yeah, I mean, I could spend the rest of my life thinking about that and studying it, which is partially what engages me and like keeps my interest in the medium. You know, I haven't moved on to painting. Like I can romanticize that in my mind, but I'm still very interested in wrestling with the medium of photography and figuring out what its limitations are, and it kind of goes back to the Invisible Yoke and the topic that we were talking about earlier. Like the limitations of photography are that it's surface, right? You can't show inner states very well. And what I'm interested in with photography is the visible world, mostly, or some invisible aspects of it. So the Invisible Yoke is about the weight of collective memory on the American consciousness, which is to say that we all have an idea of what some of these places may look like, even if we've not been there. You have expectations and stereotypes that come to mind. And hopefully the photographs that I'm making there can access that mental bank that we all carry with us and subvert some of the things that we think in an ideal world. But that's a very artsy-fartsy kind of aspiration. has no real tangible bearing on the world, right? But that's kind of what that work is getting at.
Yeah. For the second segment, I always ask the guest to bring a topic of their own, and it can just be anything at all that you are interested in, whatever is on your mind. So, what would you like to talk about today?
I do apologize that I didn't do my homework on that aspect of it. What is on my mind today? I tend to be pretty ADD, and my brain jumps the tracks multiple times a day. Been thinking a lot about how I'm going to put this work into the world over the coming years, and how I'm going to fund that and make the time for it. I spent a lot of time recently applying for teaching jobs, which is a shift in gears for me, and certainly have some nervousness about tying myself down to the full-time thing, but I know that I need to for my family. But of course, I know it's this idea of flexibility and being able to go and make work a sense of freedom. That's what I crave a lot of the time, but I have to get that in doses a few times a year.
Yeah.
Trips and travels and things. And honestly, I theoretically could do the same thing while teaching. So
yeah. It's interesting, I can't remember where exactly, if it was in an interview or maybe it was in some statement of yours, at an artist statement or something I read at some point, where you talked actually about being a young man and having a young family and not really knowing what you were doing, but needing to make it work for your family. And,
yeah.
And that's something that I think a lot of us, sort of, especially in the arts, but not even just that, just in general, a lot of us, sort of struggle with how to balance, what our responsibilities might be, and that can bear out in a lot of different ways, like responsibility to different people or different ideas, or even just to your work. how to make that work and how to balance that with sort of, whatever direction might feel more urgent personally. I don't know. It's something I certainly struggle with. I have I have an artistic practice with writing and photography and a few other things. But that doesn't pay the bills for me. So I have a day job and I'm an electrical engineer for my work. But that finding that balance is, I think, it's a tricky thing. It's
Yeah, I think we settled on our topic for sure. This is definitely something that's on my mind on a daily basis, and more recently as I'm trying, finished up the MFA, I'm applying for teaching jobs, most of which I'm not qualified for. I have no idea what I would do if I got one, but I still desperately want to make the right move for my family, because I feel like the work for the last 10 years has been eating into family. There's still periods where I don't have any assignments, I'm not working on projects, I'm home. Just the sporadic roller coaster kind of nature of making a living, making work in that way it's difficult to sustain long term while being a dad.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a constant wrestling match that's going on inside of me. Part of me wants to just get some sort of day job that has nothing to do with photography, where I can, wash dishes or something that, and let my mind roam and work out some ideas, and then go make my work just for myself. That I know that I love being part of an artistic community and engaging, people trying to work out ideas in their own practice. So I think that teaching photography would be a good way to do that.
Yeah.
And have a semi-stable life and schedule and make work around that.
Yeah. It's always sort of like a weird thing to kind of feel like you're being pulled in a couple of different directions. Because, I know for me, my family, my wife, and I have 3 kids, and the oldest is 8, the youngest is 2, and, it's funny because, my family is... I want to say they're everything to me, because in a lot of ways they are, right? It matters very deeply to me to be a good dad and to be a good husband and to be there for them. And I take a lot of joy in the time that I get to spend with my wife and my kids. But at the same time, feeling like it's the weird thing about having an artistic practice is that for almost everybody that does, I mean, there are some collaborative forms, but almost everybody that does, especially visual arts or writing, it's a very solitary exercise. And it's the kind of thing where you can't really be doing it while you're being a dad or at the same exact moment. And it's tough to sort of find, if you're spending time on one, you can feel like you're neglecting the other and the other way around, Is that ever...
That's constantly a thing.
Yeah.
There are times where I can go out and work on a project for a week or 2 weeks and I'm not making any money, but I'm maybe funding it with a grant or something like that, but I'm losing time with family to put in time in the work. I've come to think of these different projects as relationships. You know what I mean? So you have your family relationship, and then you've got 4 different project relationships, and I'm sure my wife probably views them more as affairs. They're these relationships that take me away from family, right? And they consume my attention sometimes when I am with family. And that can be problematic on a lot of levels. So I'm always trying to compartmentalize things okay, now it's my work time, and I will deal with these projects and these, thoughts and ideas, and then they get home from school, and hopefully I can put that aside and engage this other part of me. But when making family work, that's even more prevalent, where there are moments that my wife has had to say, okay, dude, it's time to put down that camera and be a dad now. Because you get so into, there's a thing that's happening, and I need to make a picture, and yeah, so I'm always moving between one and the other.
Yeah.
More and more recently, as I'm photographing family, like cameras nearby or upstairs or something, and I'll see something, light hits something a certain way, or one of the kids is doing something goofy, and I just kind of like, I could be pretty chill and sedentary and like hanging out, and then I see a photograph and I just jump up and run and grab a camera and try and make the picture. Sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't.
Yeah. That's something that, you know, for me, because a lot of the work that I do is with my photography is pretty personal, and I also do family oriented work, and it's sort of I always find there's a sort of weird duality with the act of taking photographs that like a lot of people will say like that you know, if you're taking a photograph, that means you're not engaged with the thing that you're photographing, that you're engaged with photographing instead of the thing itself. And
I'm not sure if I buy that argument.
What's that?
I'm not sure if I buy that argument. I've totally heard that before, and sometimes it's very true, but sometimes I would argue that photography can allow you to engage with something on a deeper level.
Yeah.
Or like look at something more closely or more intimately or with more attention.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things, like, particularly with, I think with family-oriented work that, and this is something that, you know, for me, my family work is explicitly about, and that yours, I see the same thing in it, that it's all made up of these little in-between moments that you might not be paying attention to if you weren't thinking about them photographically, that I think a lot of people, they just sort of pass by and then you forget about them and you don't really think about these little moments, these little, like, oh, the way the light is playing on my daughter's face is really beautiful right now, or like, oh, this is a really tender moment between my two kids, or, you know, some things like that. Like, but, you know, those are most of the moments of your life are all those little forgettable things that, you know, people don't really pay a lot of attention to. I personally find that the photographic impulse forces me to think about them more and to look at them more directly, you know?
And that's a unifying thread between the way that I work when I'm at home and when I'm elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for all of those same sorts of things. I've just got different, you know, intimate knowledge that I bring to the family work, and the sort of outsider curiosity that I bring to the other work. But I'm looking for the same visual threads between these different things.
Yeah. It's one of the things that's a little tough about making family-oriented work, is that because you're so close to it, that, like, I mean, I know there's no way at all that I see my family with anything like objectivity or real clarity, but that I, you know, you're saying before about what photography can do well and what it can't do well, that it's when you throw in like your personal closeness to the subject, that, like, I don't know, there's always that sort of, you know, when you're trying to do something personal with your work, that there's this urge to, because it's a photograph and people are going to take photographs as sort of like, we understand them as like evidentiary or as you know, as reality, and they're not necessarily great at showing internal states, but then your internal state as the photographer is so central to how you make the photographs in the first place. I don't know, it's always kind of like a weird, I don't know, I keep saying balance over and over again, but it, you know, it comes to me, that thought comes to me a lot, you know?
Yeah. Exactly. I'm sitting outside right now, and the light is coming through the trees, and every time the wind blows, there's a gust of leaves that fall kind of in this snow, rain sort of pattern in different parts of the yard. And it's really beautiful that it is not a photograph.
Yeah.
Going back to the limitations of the medium, I can sit here and I can enjoy it, but if I tried to wrap my head around this in a photographic way, it would just come out flat. So, yeah, it's fun to push against the limitations when you can. And sometimes just to sit back and enjoy it.
Yeah.
Wash over you.
Well, we're getting pretty close to time. The last question I like to ask everyone is, if there's one piece of art or creativity that has been meaningful to you recently.
It would really be hard to narrow it down to one thing.
Well, you can have a few, sure.
Okay. I mean, being in an MFA program, I got to intimately know 12, 13 other photographers in my group that are all making really exceptional work and putting their entire being into it. And, got a couple of the books that they made, and the other ones that don't have books yet. I'm very excited to see what they end up doing with those things. It's been a lot of really great photo books coming out recently. I just got Stacey Krantz's Speak Your Piece, which is kind of a zine format of the book. It's just a few photographs, super sensitive and tender, and excerpts from this newspaper column where people could just write in or call in with their thoughts and feelings, all from this one area in Kentucky that Krantz has been working. And the combination of the words and the pictures is really powerful, and the pictures kind of take a backseat to the words in a pretty effective way, I think. So that was one that came recently that I really enjoyed. I just got Shane Lavalette's book. Let's see what else. John Francis Peters' Falling book. It's got a lot of beautiful images in it. He drew from this kind of long-term study. Gregory Halpern's new book about California. It's got some really, really lovely images in it. And there's a couple things that I'm pretty excited about and waiting for, like Lost Coast. Now I'm blanking on his name. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Yeah, I'm blanking on that one guy's name. But his book is due in very soon. And the book's called Lost Coast.
All right.
Yeah, those are a few things. I listen to a lot of music. I haven't really found any one thing recently that moved me in a special way, but I'm always looking and listening.
Cool.
The photographer for Lost Coast is Corinne Heidelberg. Remember his name? All
right. Well, I want to say thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate your time. I had a good time talking to you, so thank you.
Likewise. Thanks for asking me. It was really nice meeting you out in California. Thanks for picking up a copy of the book, too.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. I hope you stuck with it all the way through, because I think there was a lot in this one, and I'm glad this is the one we're ending 2016 on. I mentioned at the top of the show that Matt's book, Carry Me Ohio, is sold out, but he's got some other interesting stuff for sale via his website, prints and a limited edition early version of the Invisible Yoke book. I've put a link for that in the show notes, so check that out. And just in general, check out his site. He's got all 4 parts of the Invisible Yoke on there, plus the family work that I mentioned in the conversation, plus more. It's definitely worth your time. And that is our show. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can email me at podcast@keepthechanneleopen.com. You can follow me and the show on Twitter at ChannelOpenPod or on Facebook at facebook.com/keepthechanneleopen. If you'd like to help out the show, the best way to do that is by leaving a review on iTunes. I put a link in the show notes for that as well. And you can subscribe to the show via iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast app. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can find more of his music available for licensing at soundofpicture.com. I want to wish you all a safe and happy holiday season and new year, and I'll be back in 2017 with plenty of new episodes for you. First up in January will be photographer Rachel Short, so be sure to come back for that one. And until then, remember, keep the channel open.